I'm Michael Knox. I'm a forensic consultant that does crime scene reconstruction and traffic accident reconstruction. We focus primarily on shooting incidents. I spent 15 years working as a police officer with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, and I spent the bulk of that in investigations. One of the biggest cases that I did during my career with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office was one in which an 8-year-old girl was sitting on her bed watching Cat in the Hat when some people who her uncle had had bad dealings with came and fired 29 shots into the house that she was in, and she was shot and killed while sitting on her bed watching television. That particular case, I went to trial in what was a death penalty charge against the person that actually pulled the trigger, that actually shot her. And what I had done in that case is reconstruct all of the shots and figured out where each of the 29 shots was fired from, and then use that information to determine which one of the 3 people that were shooting at this house actually shot this little girl. We were able to do that, and I was able to present that in court. One of the things that we used in court was a model, a large-scale model to show all of the trajectories where each shot passed through the house. And that gave the jury the opportunity to actually take this model back to the jury room and deliberate with this model. So they could reference it, they could look at it, they could know what they had, and from that they could make a much more informed decision.
I'm Michael LaForte. I'm the Senior Forensic Consultant here at Knox & Associates. My job is to review the cases as they come in and put together the information, reconstruct the crime scenes based on the information we receive through police reports, autopsy reports, the evidence that's been collected, and the photographs. I was in the Navy in the early 70s. I was a quartermaster, and so I got the idea that maybe police officer wouldn't be so bad once I got out. In 1973, I applied with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. In December of 1974, I was hired as a police officer and sent to the academy. After spending 15 years in patrol, in July of 1988, I transferred to the crime scene unit, where I stayed until my retirement in 2003. During the 15 years I was with the crime scene unit, I worked in excess of 9,500 crime scenes. A little over 800 of those were death scenes, and 500 of those were homicide scenes. Probably the biggest crime scene, the one that had the most impact, was a homicide of a female in 1993. Her body was found under the overpass of Interstate 295 on the northwest side of Jacksonville. And I processed her body using an alternate light source. And I was able to find and recover, using photography, a couple of fingerprints, latent bloody fingerprints on her skin. A match was finally made, and the killer was arrested and pled guilty to multiple murders.
Crime scene reconstruction has been described as putting together a puzzle but not having access to the box top. And not only that, you don't have access to all the pieces. So if you can imagine putting together a jigsaw puzzle, we don't have all the pieces, we don't know what the picture is supposed to look like. But what we do is we put the pieces together the best that we can, given what we have, and in many cases enough of the picture will show up that we can tell what it is. One of the problems that we see with a lot of crime scenes is that law enforcement doesn't tend to really delve into the fine details to figure out exactly what really happened. All too often what happens is that an investigator somewhere early on decides a certain theory that this is how it happened, and so then everything they do from there on out in terms of evidence collection and processing is geared towards proving that theory correct. There's a lot of tiny pieces that you have to take into account, and you can't discount any piece of evidence and say, well, that must just not have any relation. What you have to do is analyze each piece in context, and then look at this overall picture and figure out what do you have here in terms of what happened. You do not set out to prove yourself right. If you set out with a particular theory and decide, my job is to prove this theory, then you're going to almost certainly succeed, only you may be totally wrong.
Probably the biggest problem that we see is lack of understanding of the physical evidence and not comparing it to the testimonial evidence. Prior to my retirement and starting to do consulting work, as a police officer, I would have never believed it was this bad. But now that I'm able to look at the work of law enforcement and see what is actually being turned in, what is being given to prosecutors, and the people that are being arrested and charged with crimes that they really didn't commit, it is really more than I had ever figured possible. So what we're seeing is law enforcement is taking the testimony of witnesses and victims, and then they're finding the physical evidence that supports these stories, and it really doesn't matter what the defendant or the suspect prior to being arrested has to say about it. And so there's no comparison to refute either the physical evidence with the testimonial or testimony with the physical, and that's where we really find the problems, and we're able to offer some kind of defense in a lot of the cases. And when we're for the state, we assist in the problems, and that wasn't done by law enforcement. We're able to to bring those points out and make a stronger case.
If I gave you a jigsaw puzzle of the Eiffel Tower, for example, and I gave you part of it, I took a handful of pieces out of the box before I handed it to you. If you began to put that together, you would probably see enough of the Eiffel Tower that you would recognize it. You would say, okay, this is a puzzle that shows a picture of the Eiffel Tower. But we don't always have that many pieces. If I took out the pieces from the middle of the Eiffel Tower and handed you only the ones that showed the perimeter, you might not recognize it. You might not know enough about the landmarks around the Eiffel Tower to know that that's what you're looking at. But if I gave you the pieces down the middle, you'd be very clear on the fact that it's the Eiffel Tower. If I gave you some of the pieces in the middle and some of the pieces in the perimeter, you would probably still make out the fact that it's the Eiffel Tower. So our ability to get this picture, to be able to figure out what happened, is very much contingent on not only how many pieces we have, but what pieces we have. Whether it gives us the picture down the middle, if it gives us that important data to help us put together what happened with these events, or whether it gives us sort of the perimeter, the edges of the data. If that's what we get, then it might be a little bit harder to actually reconstruct and determine anything meaningful from that crime scene evidence.